Hi, my name is Henriikka Laurola. I work in Maria Academy, that is a Finnish NGO supporting women who seek help for the violent behavior. I work in a project called Tunne Voimavarasi that aims to prevent violence and neglect in family care relationships, specifically among women over the age of 60. Today, I will talk to you about violence by women, so the diversity of the phenomenon and the challenges in identifying and addressing abuse with women. The contents of my presentation today will be, I will start by introducing Maria Academy and our Tunne Voimavarasi project. I will talk about the diversity of violence by women and the root causes behind the violent behavior. I will explore the characteristics of violence by women, including abuse and neglect by elderly female carers. I will tell you about the services of Maria Academy for women seeking help for their violent behavior. And then we will talk about intervention, meaning recognizing violence and abuse, and also addressing and talking about violence with women. I will end my presentation today by talking about the importance of developing professional self-awareness when working with violence. So let's start. A little bit about my organization. Maria Academy is a national specialist association that works for sustainable well-being of individuals and communities. We aim to increase the well-being of young people, women, families, and communities, and to reduce violence and abuse. Our activities include services for violence prevention, therapy services, occupational well-being related services, and also intergenerational work. Our organization has 15 employees and then trainers and other specialists. In 2020 alone, we reached around 4,000 clients in all our activities. So our violence prevention services, we have a framework that is psychodynamic and gender specific. This means we only work with women. And the psychodynamic part of this is that we focus on getting to know oneself and one's life history through self-reflection. Very central to our client work is the strengthening of emotion recognition and regulation skills. So also identifying one's own boundaries and finding new ways to behave. We ask our clients to commit to nonviolent behavior, and we encourage them to learn to take responsibility and trusting one's capabilities to have influence in life. And this also then leads to increased self-esteem and also self-compassion. Working with us, getting help from our services is an opportunity to break chains of violence that have been passed along through generations very often. And very essential to all the help we provide is raising and maintaining hope. Our violence prevention services consist of 4 different activities. They are aimed for women of different ages. So Demeter consists of helpline, chat, individual support discussions, and peer support groups for adult women. And Demeter work is available both in person and online. Then we have Naisen Väkivalta, that is a service fully online, so consists of chat, individual support discussions, and peer support groups, also for adult women. Keijun Varjo, on the other hand, is targeted for girls aged 15 to 28, and also consists of chat, individual support discussions, and peer support groups, in person and online. And then there's the project that I work in, so the Tunne Voimavarasi. It is a collaborative project, and our clients are elderly female carers over the age of 60, and we organize individual support discussions and peer support groups in person and online. I wish to talk to you about the project Tunne Voimavarasi that I work in. It is a 3-year-old project that ends at the end of next year, and it's funded by the Finnish Ministry of Health and Social Welfare. So as said, it is a collaborative project by 4 NGOs. Maria Academia is only one of them. And our objectives are to improve the well-being of elderly female carers and to prevent violence and abuse in family care relationships. On the other hand, we wish to increase the knowledge and know-how of professionals and volunteers so they could recognize and intervene in violence in family care relationships better. And all the client work we do is based on Maria Academy's violence prevention services. So we use the same psychodynamic and gender-specific framework in our services. So let's move on to the phenomenon, violence by women. What does it consist of? What kind of a phenomenon is it? Well, first of all, it is a phenomenon that is very difficult to study, and it's actually a very hidden social problem because only a small part of all incidents are recorded by the police, other authorities, or professionals. And if we look at surveys and statistics, they actually provide very different data depending how we record the data and who we interview and how. So for instance, crime statistics versus victim surveys provide very different information. In terms of intimate partner violence, a national survey study done in Finland in 2010 actually tells that there's a very subtle difference between the sexes in the number of victims of intimate partner violence. So 17% of women and 16% of men in this study reported having experienced physical violence or being threatened with such at some point during their current relationship. However, the number of incidents was higher for women and the physical and psychological consequences were more severe. So it seems to be clear that men hesitate more in reporting experiences of intimate partner violence due to shame and fear of not being believed. There may also be differences in recognizing different forms of violence. In terms of child abuse, women are less likely than men to accept disciplinary violence against children, but they actually use it more often than men. And this is also information we have learned from studies. The smaller the child, the more often the perpetrator is his or her mother. So it seems to be true that addressing violence by women is a crucial opportunity to break chains of violence that have passed along through generations. Women's aggression is actually a big taboo in our society, and the taboo protects and holds a certain cultural image we want to have of femininity and motherhood. And talking about taboos, the larger the crowd that maintains the taboo, the more powerful it is. Maintaining this kind of taboo dehumanizes a violent woman and actually can then, at worst, inflict more violence. The taboo also makes it very difficult for women to seek and receive help. Or when they are seeking help for the violent behavior, women's worry is often being ignored by professionals, or then it's being explained by lack of sleep or stress. It's being defined as something normal, that a woman sometimes loses their nerves, but it's just part of the for instance, the years when the baby is really small and there's a lot of lack of sleep and a lot of stress. But the woman herself, we don't trust her understanding of when we should be concerned of her behavior and what is too much for her to carry. So we have a myth about the ideal mother, a very strong cultural idea, and it presents women as mainly caregivers and givers of life. As this presented image does not fit anything else, we find it really difficult to accept that women also can be aggressive. And even the idea of an aggressive woman or a violent mother, causes a lot of fear and contradiction in us. And this is true, of course, for women who suffer from their own violent behavior, but it's also true for professionals who face and meet women who seek help for their behavior. We also have the ideal of a good girl. This is often how girls are raised. So they are raised to be very performance focused and raised to be very ruthless to themselves. This, of course, causes a lot of internal insecurity because only behavior that fits in the image of a good girl is allowed. So women learn to become very demanding of themselves. The lesson given early on to women is you will be only loved if you are kind and well behaved. Well, this means, of course, that feelings of aggression are learned to press down. And if we press down emotions, they may develop into destructive behavior towards ourselves or others sooner or later, very often. So the causes of violence, first of all, we have learned that there's an intergenerational legacy, so experiences of wounding interactions and traumatic experiences in life. What we have also learned when working with our clients is that very often the women seeking help have grown up in a challenging emotional atmosphere. So they often feel that they haven't been seen or heard. The conflicts in their home environment have been resolved in a destructive way. They were not allowed to show difficult emotions, and they were not allowed to practice overcoming disappointments in a safe way. So aggression was an emotion completely prohibited for them. All in all, they have a very strong experience of being ignored and left unseen and unheard. And we all know that when we are under pressure, we are not always able to find creative and constructive solutions, but actually we start acting based on learned coping mechanisms. And as I mentioned, as the first point on this slide, so the intergenerational legacy, very early on in our childhood, we learn from our parents how to deal with those difficult emotions that rise in conflict situations. So based on our experiences in Maria Academy, we can say that a wounded little girl lives inside every violently behaving woman. And this is the guiding principle of all the empathy we want to support in our services. Let's move on to the different forms of violence and abuse. First of all, there's physical violence, which can, for instance, be slapping, hitting, kicking, tearing, strangling, throwing objects. Then there's mental or emotional or psychological abuse, which can be, for instance, intimidation, manipulation, control, belittling, and raging. Self-directed abuse is actually very common among women. This can be, for instance, cutting, starving oneself, or binge eating, ruthless and self-destructive behavior of all kinds. Social violence means isolation, control of social life, or discrimination. Sexual violence may be calling names, coercing, pressuring, harassment, and in worst case, rape. Financial abuse means controlling and prohibiting the use of money, or it can be stealing. Religious abuse is belittling or mocking spirituality or religion, or forcing a particular behavior or lifestyle. And finally, there's digital abuse. This is often common in intimate partner violence. So that means the control of communication with others, checking someone else's call and message information, restriction of social media use, or dissemination of private images. So when we talk about women and violence, physical violence for women is often scratching, pinching, slapping, obstructing movement, throwing or breaking objects, or hurting oneself. And this is now the context of intimate partner violence. And of course, it is true that even mild physical violence hurts. It always violates another's integrity and does not belong to a safe relationship. And what is also true in intimate partner violence is that the categories of victim and perpetrator may be more nuanced than we think. There may not be a clear perpetrator and a clear victim, but actually these roles can be a little bit mixed. Nevertheless, being a victim does not eliminate the need to receive help for one's own violent behavior. So firstly, we need to define whether the safety of the woman is in danger or at risk. And then depending on that, we need to define whether she needs victim services or services for perpetrators, such as Maria Academy services in the first place. So violence in informal care relationships differs from intimate partner violence in a way that the violence and abuse may be intentional, but it also may be unintentional, which means that it can be caused by the lack of skills, knowledge, and resources of the carer. And violence is typically defined from the perspective of the one experiencing it. As it concerns older people, violence and abuse has been defined by the World Health Organization as follows. A single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action occurring within any relationship where there is an expectation of trust, which causes harm or distress to an older person. So in addition to the forms of violence I mentioned earlier, of course, within the context of informal care relationship, we often talk about neglect of proper care. But very often in our clients, the most common forms of abuse actually include mental abuse or self-directed abuse. So a carer may not allow themselves proper rest, or they might demand that they must do everything perfectly. So they must be the perfect carer. We talk about the ideal of a perfect mother, but there's also an ideal of a perfect carer. And this is often very hard for women to acknowledge that they do not have to be perfect and do everything on their own, but they can actually seek help and support. There are also some specific challenges in informal care relationship dynamics that are really important for professionals to understand when working with carers. So very often, especially in the case of older generations, love and care responsibilities are seen as having no limits or accepted exits. So very often we hear older women saying, well, I have once promised until death do us apart, so there's no way out of this. I don't know which one of us will die first, but nevertheless, I will not give up. Also, the letting go of a loved one as he or she used to be and of one's familiar way of living a life often causes a lot of feelings of bitterness and sorrow. And we know that aggression as an emotion is not often the main emotion, but behind it, there's often very difficult emotions such as these. In case there have been conflicts, or for instance, intimate partner violence in the relationship of the carer and the care recipient, before the relationship turned into a caring relationship, of course, all these conflicts will come to the surface again. And this is especially because there's a shift of power. So suddenly one person is fully dependent on the other, and the other one loses their own time and space completely. In case there has been intimate partner violence, often there might be feelings of wanting to have a revenge for the partner who has mistreated you all those years. So all these kind of thoughts and intrusive feelings can then arise. What is often the case in informal care relationship, especially among older people. So most older carers take care of a partner who has a memory disorder or dementia. Very commonly, they have aggressive behavioral symptoms. So it is still the case today that professionals are not always seeing these symptoms as violent from the perspective of the carer, but they are just seen as part of the disease. So carers are told just to manage with them, just to go on and take them as the disease. But we need to acknowledge that it is still an experience of violence, no matter if the cause behind is a disease or something else. So then going back to younger clients of Maria Academy, so the most callers on our helpline are actually aged 25 to 44. Most often they have used violence against their partners or children. And more than 70% of our clients have children younger than school age. And typically the situation at home worsens after the birth of the second child. Based on our statistics, on our clients, violence is most often heavy-handed treatment and uncontrolled outbursts of rage. So the service path of Maria Academy, women contacting us first contact our helpline or chat services. So they can call us, or then they can send us an email, or they can access our chat services on our website. After that, they are able to have individual discussions with a specialist. These can be from 3 to 5 appointments that are organized on the phone or online or in person in case the woman lives in Helsinki or Tampere area. And in case the woman wants, and we as specialists define that the woman is capable of and would benefit from participating in a peer support group, then they will be provided the opportunity. And our peer support groups meet 10 to 15 times, 2 hours per week, and there's 5 to 8 women in a group. These groups meet in person or online. And the final step of our service path is that there's a follow-up meeting. So 4 to 6 months after the last group meeting, then the group will meet again, and we will get the chance to see what have been the long-term effects of our services. Well, here I want to present you some results from our peer support group. So we do a little survey after the last meeting of the group. So in our surveys, 82% strongly or quite strongly agree that they have managed to act non-violently after participating in the group. 82% agree to feel better due to participating in the group. 79% feel that their self-appreciation has improved. 74% strongly or quite strongly agree that the participation in the group has also benefited their family members. So very good results, I would say. The mini intervention we are developing in the Tunne Voimavarasi project for elderly female carers, it differs a little bit from the service path of Maria Academy's other activities. So it is still based in the same violence prevention services with the same psychodynamic and gender-specific framework. However, it only consists of the individual support discussions and peer support group. And participation to these is possible both face-to-face and online. So we are able to have a national reach for our services. what is very special about this project is that we are collaborating with carers organizations across Finland. So they are developing and testing the intervention with us during the project. And then the intervention model is free to be used by any organization after the project has ended. So this way we will guarantee that the model will actually be used in carers organizations across Finland also after the project has ended. So let's move on to intervention. First of all, recognizing violence by women. The starting point in this is always to think, how do we as professionals understand violence? And is it the same way or different way than our clients? So especially we have noticed that with older generations, there are very different perceptions of what constitutes violence. Very often among older generations, they only think of physical violence when we talk about violence. So it's always very good to define and explain what violence means nowadays, and then let the client reflect on the definition. The diversity of violence is very important to identify. Very often people's perceptions are narrow, and this is true for older people, but it can also be true for younger people. Women often describe their own violence or abuse as mental. This can manifest as rage, invalidation, contempt, intimidation, giving silent treatment, or other hostile behavior. Mental abuse is, of course, more difficult to identify because it often means hurting by words or by insulting behavior, and that leaves no physical marks. However, actually, mental abuse may have a greater impact on a person's mental well-being throughout their life cycle than physical violence. And this is also what the research says. So we know that physical marks heal faster than bruises of the mind. And violence is often very traumatizing, and we know that trauma has very long-lasting effects on a person. In care relationships, there are specific risk factors for violence and neglect that we can take into consideration when we wish to be better at recognizing and identifying violence. So first of all, the biggest risk factor is caregiver stress and burnout. And then, as said earlier, it's also a big risk factor if the person receiving care has difficult behavioral symptoms of dementia. Other risk factors include lack of social support and isolation, lack of necessary services, lack of knowledge and skills in relation to care tasks. And a big risk factor is also emotional dependence between the caregiver and the care receiver, as well as previous relationship problems. So in case there has been intimate partner violence in the relationship before the power dynamic then shifts. Financial problems are, of course, a big cause of caregiver stress and burnout, as well as depression and other mental health problems. So, when addressing violence with women, it is very important to acknowledge that becoming aware of one's own violent behavior causes feelings of guilt, shame, and anxiety. And these are very natural feelings, and healthy guilt and shame can lead to change. But actually, if we feel these emotions excessively, then it might prevent change. We might freeze, we might not want to change because the shame is too much for us to handle. So it's really important as a professional to think, in which direction do I steer my client? Will I make her feel more shame and more guilt, or will I ease her burden? And can I be empathetic towards her without accepting her behavior in her relationship? So taking responsibility for one's own violence and admitting violent behavior is the most important and at the same time the most difficult step in trying to end violent behavior. And actually, the more unidentified one's own violent behavior is, the more it provokes resistance when a professional addresses the violence. So in Maria Academy, it's easier for us because women come to us voluntarily. So they have already identified that there's something wrong with their behavior and they want help. But of course, this is not always the case. Sometimes women know that something is wrong. They might seek help for the burden they experience at home, for being stressful or not being able to sleep. But then when we talk more with them, we understand that there's also violence in the picture. And this is then where we as professionals need to empathetically address the issue with the client. So at the moment of taking responsibility, it is of paramount importance that the person is genuinely seen and heard. We don't just see their behavior that is wrong or shame them about it, but we see them as a person, and as a person with strengths who is also able to do good things and able to act right. So we also need to be able to refer the client to the right services, depending on what the needs of the client is. And in summary, it is very important to take the client and her problems seriously, not ignoring her worries about her behavior, taking it seriously and providing help specifically for the things that she wishes to receive help for. We need to be empathetic. We always need to remember to provide hope, to provide clear information and instructions. So we do not leave our clients alone with their issues. Always dare to ask. I have listed here specific questions to address violence with women. And these are questions we use on the phone, in our chat, in our individual discussions. And very often we have found them very useful, and they make our clients think. So first of all, we can ask, what is particularly stressful in your life right now? In what ways could the situation be eased? What kind of help would you need? Then if the woman has identified violent behavior in herself, we can ask what happens when they lose their nerves, when they feel fed up or find themselves in a conflict. So what kind of feelings arise and how do they behave in such situations? It's of course very important to stop acting violently, to understand what happens before the situation escalates. So we guide the women to explore what kind of feelings and thoughts they have at the moment of escalation and how do they feel in their body. To prevent violent behavior in the future, we can ask them if there have been times they have been triggered but have managed to act non-violently. So going through, how did they do it? Could they do it again? Could we support them in acting non-violently in the future? And of course, we want to encourage them to take responsibility of their own behavior, not to stay in a victim position, but actually understand that they can make change in their own lives. The final thing I would want to talk about is professional self-awareness. We work a lot around this topic in Maria Academy. And it really means thinking about your own relationship to anger, rage, and aggression, and your own perception to violence. This is really important because if we are unable to manage or understand or recognize our own emotions as professionals, this causes stress and anxiety and has effects of course, to our own well-being, but it also has effects in the larger work community. And there is always a danger that unacknowledged emotions will surface uncontrollably in demanding client situations. So by studying your own internal script and life history, have I experienced violence? Have I been violent to someone in my life? You can actually strengthen your professional self-awareness, and you will be a better professional. You will be more supportive. You will be more empathetic without taking the client's burden to carry. With our clients, we always need to remember that the client is accepted. Their violent behavior may not be accepted, but the client always is. So we want to see the good in our clients and actually strengthen that good they have. Thank you. That has been my presentation today. And here on this slide, you can see my contact information and the websites of our project and also of my organization. So please visit our websites and contact us for more information. Thank you.